In this video, we're breaking down 2 hours of disturbing Simpsons theories and unsolved mysteries. Let's get started. Starting it off with what might be the darkest fan theory in television history. The theory that Homer Simpson has been lying in a hospital bed, trapped inside his own mind, dreaming every single episode of The Simpsons for over 30 years. And the show told us exactly when it happened. In October 1992, an episode called Homer the Heretic aired. It's Season 4, Episode 3. Most of the episode is about Homer skipping church and having an incredible day at home while his family freezes at Sunday service. But the ending is what matters. Homer falls asleep and his house catches fire. He nearly dies. And when he's rescued, he has a conversation with God. Not a metaphorical conversation, not a dream within a dream. God appears to Homer as a 5-fingered being, which is strange because every other character in The Simpsons only has 4 fingers, and they talk. Homer asks God the question every human eventually asks. What is the meaning of life? God says he can't tell him that. Homer pushes. God says he'll find out when he dies. Homer says he can't wait that long. And then God says something that should have made every viewer pause the episode and stare at the screen. You can't wait 6 months? 6 months. God told Homer Simpson he would die in 6 months, not eventually, not someday. 6 months from the air date of that episode. Now fast forward exactly 6 months, April 1st, 1993, April Fool's Day. The Simpsons airs Season 4, Episode 18. It's called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. In this episode, Bart pulls an April Fool's prank on Homer. He takes one of Homer's beer cans and sticks it in a paint shaker. When Homer opens the can, the explosion is so violent it nearly destroys the house and sends Homer to the hospital. At the hospital, while recovering, Homer notices a candy vending machine across the room. He forces himself to walk toward it. He starts shoving candy bars into his mouth. And the vending machine falls on top of him. Homer is rushed into emergency care. He's placed in a coma. The family gathers at his bedside. They reminisce about the good times. They remember the past. And then, at the very end of the episode, Homer wakes up. He starts choking Bart, because of course he does. Everyone laughs. Roll credits. Except here's what the theory proposes, and what millions of people now believe. Homer didn't wake up. That recovery was too sudden, too convenient, too clean. A vending machine crushed a man who was already hospitalized from an explosion, and he just opens his eyes and goes home? No. What actually happened is that Homer died. Or rather, he entered a state so deep that his consciousness detached from reality and began constructing its own. Everything you've watched since April 1st, 1993, every single episode from the tail end of Season 4 all the way through Season 37 and beyond, is happening inside the mind of a man lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, dreaming an endless dream that will never end because nobody is pulling the plug. This theory was first articulated in February 2015 by a Reddit user named Hard Topic a Name. The post exploded across the internet. It made worldwide news. It was covered by TMZ, Yahoo, the front page of multiple news outlets in Australia, Belgium, and across Europe. And the evidence, once you start looking at it, is genuinely unsettling. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was grounded. This is documented, undeniable, and acknowledged by the show's own writers and cast. Seasons 1 through the first half of Season 4 dealt with real problems. Homer couldn't afford Christmas presents in the very first episode. Lisa had a crush on her substitute teacher. Bart struggled with failing grades. Marge and Homer dealt with marital problems. The plots were small, the emotions were real, the stakes were human. After the coma, everything changed. Homer goes to space in Deep Space Homer, Season 5, Episode 15. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer wins a Grammy with a barbershop quartet. He battles a tribe of jockeys living under the racetrack. Marge gets breast implants. Homer becomes an astronaut, a bodyguard, a monorail conductor, a food critic, a truck driver, a missionary, and about 70 other professions that a man with his qualifications should never hold. The show didn't just get wackier, it became untethered from reality entirely. And if you accept the theory, the reason is obvious. Homer's dreaming, and dreams don't have rules. The aging problem is the most haunting piece of evidence. Nobody in The Simpsons ages. Bart has been 10 years old for over 35 years. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been 1. Homer and Marge haven't gained a single wrinkle. The show's official explanation is a floating timeline, a storytelling device where the present year updates but the characters stay the same age. But the coma theory provides a much simpler explanation. Homer remembers his family as they were the day the vending machine fell. Bart was 10, Lisa was 8, Maggie was a baby. In Homer's mind, they will always be those ages because that's the last time he saw them with his own eyes. His subconscious can't age them because it doesn't know what they look like older. It only knows the family that existed on April 1st, 1993. But here's where it gets really clever. Homer's mind isn't completely isolated. People in comas can sometimes hear what's happening around them. Doctors, nurses, family members talking at the bedside, a television playing in the background. Homer's dreaming brain processes this ambient information and weaves it into his fantasy. That's why the show is flooded with celebrity cameos that started appearing more and more after season 4. Homer's family visits. They talk about what's happening in the world. They mention celebrities, they discuss news, and Homer's unconscious mind absorbs it all, folding real-world people and events into his dream. Lady Gaga shows up in season 23 because someone mentioned her near Homer's hospital bed. Elon Musk appears in season 26 because a nurse had the news on. Every celebrity appearance isn't a writing decision. It's Homer's brain trying to make sense of sounds it can't fully comprehend. The crayon makes it worse. In season 12, episode 9, an episode called HOMR, doctors discover that Homer has had a crayon lodged in his brain since he was 6 years old. He'd shoved an entire 16-pack of crayons up his nose as a child, and when he sneezed them out, one stayed behind. The crayon reduced his IQ from 105 to 55. When doctors remove it, Homer becomes intelligent. He bonds with Lisa. He writes a safety report that shuts down the nuclear power plant. He becomes the man he was always supposed to be. And then Lisa shows him a graph. As intelligence goes up, happiness goes down. Homer looks at his daughter, the smartest and most miserable member of his family, and makes a choice. He goes to Moe, who performs what he calls the old Crayola oblongata, and puts the crayon back. If Homer's in a coma, this episode is devastating. The crayon is a metaphor his subconscious created to explain why his dream world doesn't make logical sense. The foreign object in his brain isn't a crayon, it's the coma itself. A thing lodged inside him that suppresses his higher functions, keeping him in a simplified, cartoon version of reality. And when his dreaming mind briefly imagines removing it, briefly imagines what it would be like to wake up and think clearly, it also imagines the consequence. Loneliness, alienation, the loss of everything comfortable and familiar. So Dream Homer puts the crayon back. He chooses the coma. He chooses to stay asleep because waking up means losing the only world he has left. There's also the focus shift. Before the coma episode, Bart Simpson was the star of The Simpsons. The early 1990s were defined by Bartmania. Bart's face was on every lunchbox, every t-shirt, every piece of merchandise. He was the cultural phenomenon. After the coma, Homer gradually became the undisputed protagonist of the show. If The Simpsons exists inside Homer's mind, this makes perfect sense. The dreamer naturally centers himself in his own dream. Homer didn't steal the spotlight from Bart through a writer's room decision. He stole it because it's his dream. And in your own dream, you're always the main character. The show itself acknowledged this theory. In season 34, episode 3, called Lisa the Boy Scout, the writers created a meta-episode full of fake deleted scenes that were supposedly so bad they would end the show if aired. One of those fake scenes depicted Homer waking up from a decades-long coma, directly referencing and mocking this exact theory. The show acknowledged it, they laughed at it, but they never actually disproved it. They showed it as a deliberately terrible idea for an episode, but they never explained away the evidence. The 6-month gap between God's prediction and the coma is still there. The shift from grounded to absurd is still there. The aging freeze is still there. The celebrity cameos are still there. Al Jean, the longtime showrunner of The Simpsons, was asked directly about this theory when it went viral. He called it intriguing but false. The Reddit user who created the theory edited their post to include a response that became legendary in the fandom. He says it's not true, but what does he know about The Simpsons? And honestly, that's the perfect response. Because the theory doesn't need the showrunner's blessing. It doesn't need to be officially true, it just needs to explain everything better than the alternative. And it does. Every nonsensical plot, every ignored consequence, every time Homer survives something that should kill him, every celebrity who appears for no reason, every year that passes without anyone aging a single day. The coma theory explains all of it, not with cartoon logic, not with floating timelines, with one man lying in a hospital bed dreaming a dream he'll never wake from. And somewhere in that dream, God is still waiting, because God told Homer he'd die in 6 months. And 6 months later, he did. He just didn't stop breathing, he stopped living. And the dream began. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to something that sounds like a simple trivia question, but is actually one of the deepest unsolved mysteries in television history. Where is Springfield? What state do the Simpsons live in? And why? After 790 episodes spread across 37 seasons and over 36 years of continuous broadcasting, has the show never once told us the answer? The surface-level explanation is that Matt Groening, the creator of The Simpsons, chose the name Springfield because it's one of the most common town names in America. 34 states have at least one community called Springfield. Several have more than one. Groening said in a 2012 interview with Smithsonian Magazine that he named the town after Springfield, Oregon, which is near his hometown of Portland. He said, "I figured out that Springfield was one of the most common names for a city in the US. In anticipation of the show's success, I thought, this will be cool, everyone will think it's their Springfield." And they do. So the name was chosen to be universal, generic, every viewer's hometown. But here's where it stops being a cute branding decision and becomes something much weirder. The writers didn't just avoid naming the state. They actively, aggressively, and systematically made it impossible to identify. Not through silence, through sabotage. Every time the show gets close to revealing where Springfield is, the writers plant a contradiction that destroys whatever theory you were building. And they've been doing this for over 3 decades with the precision of people who are hiding something. Start with the Simpsons movie from 2007. Ned Flanders tells Bart that the state Springfield is in borders 4 other states: Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky. Think about that for 1 second. Ohio and Kentucky share a real border. That's fine. But Nevada is on the opposite side of the country from Maine. There is no state on Earth, real or fictional, that borders all 4 of those states. It's not just wrong, it's architecturally impossible. The writers didn't accidentally pick the wrong states. They deliberately chose 4 states that could never form a coherent border, telling you in the loudest possible way that Springfield's location is not a solvable puzzle. In Season 10, Episode 12, called Sunday Cruddy Sunday, Marge is on the phone giving out her address. She starts to say the state name and says, "Oh," and then immediately sees her neighbor and says, "Hi, Maud," and hangs up. The O could be the beginning of Ohio, or it could be the beginning of Oklahoma, Oregon, or literally anything. The writers dangled the answer in front of the audience and snatched it away with a greeting. In Season 6, Episode 14, Bart's Comet, Congress votes to evacuate the town of Springfield in the great state of... And before anyone can say the name, a congressman interrupts to tack a rider onto the bill. The state name is never spoken. The show had Congress itself try to name the state and then use legislative bureaucracy to prevent it. In Season 11, Episode 22, Behind the Laughter, the Simpsons are described as a Northern Kentucky family. This seemed like confirmation, except in subsequent airings of the same episode, the audio was changed. Northern Kentucky became Missouri. The show literally changed its own answer after it aired, proving that even when they accidentally give you information, they'll retroactively erase it. The zip code for Springfield is 80085, as stated in the Season 21 episode Mo Letter Blues. If you type 80085 into a calculator and turn it upside down, it spells a crude word. That's the joke. But zip codes starting with 800 belong to Colorado. If you flip the number upside down, 58008 is a zip code in North Dakota. The show gave Springfield a zip code that simultaneously points to 2 states that are over 1,000 miles apart. David Silverman, who directed multiple episodes in the Simpsons movie, half-jokingly suggested that Springfield exists in the fictional state of North Tacoma. This would explain why Homer's driver's license sometimes shows the state abbreviation as NT or TA. It's not a real state. It's a state that only exists inside The Simpsons, which means Springfield doesn't just lack a location, it exists in a place that doesn't exist. And then there's the geography of Springfield itself. Depending on the episode, Springfield has an ocean coastline, it has deserts, it has snow-capped mountains, it has canyons, it has redwood forests, it has farmland, it has an international airport, it has a deep water harbor. No American city has all of these features. Springfield's geography isn't inconsistent because the writers are careless. It's inconsistent because the geography changes to accommodate whatever the episode needs. Mountains appear when the plot requires mountains. The ocean shows up when someone needs to go to the beach. The gorge materializes when Homer needs to fall into it. Springfield doesn't have a fixed geography because Springfield isn't a fixed place. It's a narrative construct that generates terrain on demand, like a video game loading assets as the player approaches. The state capital of Springfield's unnamed state is called Capital City. That's it. Capital City, the most generic possible name for a capital. The state flag doesn't match any real state flag. The state bird, state motto, and state boundaries change between episodes. Even the show that takes place in Springfield can't agree on what state Springfield is in because there is no state. There never was. Springfield was founded by Jebediah Springfield, a man the show later revealed was actually a pirate named Hans Sprungfeld, who once attempted to assassinate George Washington. He led a group of settlers after misinterpreting a Bible passage, and they founded a town using a fake name created by a fraud. Springfield's founding myth is literally a lie. The town was created by a con man using a stolen identity. And if the town's own creation story is fabricated, what does that tell you about the town itself? In Season 11, Episode 19, Kill the Alligator and Run, the Simpsons visit Florida and get banned from the state. They then look at a map showing every state in America that has banned them. Only 2 states remain that still welcome them, Arizona and North Dakota. Homer immediately crosses out Arizona because it smells funny. The show then mockingly announces that the Simpsons are going to North Dakota. But logically, the only state that wouldn't be marked on the map is the state the Simpsons live in, since they can't be banned from their own home state. This means, by process of elimination, the Simpsons live in North Dakota. Except this contradicts everything else. Springfield has an ocean. North Dakota is landlocked. Springfield has palm trees in some episodes. North Dakota has sub-zero winters. The show gave you the answer, and the answer is impossible, which is exactly the point. Mike Rice, a former showrunner and longtime writer for The Simpsons, wrote a book called Springfield Confidential. In it, he discusses the Springfield location mystery. He mentions that Groening considers Springfield to be based on Springfield, Oregon. And then Rice adds his own editorial comment. What the hell does Groening know? Even the show's own writer-producer dismisses the creator's answer. The people who make The Simpsons can't agree on where Springfield is because Springfield was never meant to be findable. It was meant to be everywhere and nowhere. A town that exists in every state simultaneously. A place you recognize but can't locate. The ultimate American Everytown, built on a lie, named after a fraud, located in a state that might not be real, with a geography that changes depending on who's looking. That couch gag Bart wrote on the chalkboard when Groening revealed his Oregon inspiration says everything. The true location of Springfield is in any state but yours. Not your state, anyone's state but yours. Springfield exists everywhere you aren't. The moment you think you've found it, it moves, and it's been moving for 36 years. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Now let's talk about something the show treats as a running joke but is actually terrifying when you sit with the evidence. Mr. Burns, Charles Montgomery Burns, the owner of the Springfield nuclear power plant, the richest man in town, and by every metric the show has ever established, a man who should have been dead over a century ago. Because Mr. Burns isn't just old. The canonical evidence suggests he might be functionally immortal, and the show has spent 36 seasons hiding this in plain sight. Start with his social security number. It's 000000002. That number was revealed in a gag, played for laughs, moved on from immediately. But think about what it means. The Social Security Administration was created in 1936 as part of the New Deal. The first Social Security numbers were issued that year. 000000002 means Burns was the second person in the entire United States of America to receive a Social Security number. He was already an adult, already established, already wealthy enough to be among the first Americans processed by the new federal system. If Burns was even 30 years old in 1936, that puts his birth around 1906 at the latest. But the show places his personal memories much further back than that. Burns personally recalls events from the 1890s. He references colleagues and acquaintances who were active during the Gilded Age. He speaks about historical events from the turn of the 20th century with the specificity of someone who was there, not someone who read about them. In the classic episode Rosebud, Season 5, Episode 4, we see Burns's childhood teddy bear Bobo traveling through time. Bobo is with Burns as a child, then passes through the hands of Charles Lindbergh in 1927, then Adolf Hitler in his Berlin bunker in 1945, and eventually ends up frozen in an Arctic ice floe before surfacing in Springfield. The flashbacks showing Burns as a young boy are set in the 1900s and 1910s, which means Burns was born somewhere around 1896 to 1905. That would make him in the present day somewhere between 120 and 130 years old. And he's still going to work every day. Now here's where it stops being funny and starts being genuinely unsettling. Burns should be dead, not just from old age, from everything. He's been shot at point-blank range by a baby. In the legendary two-part episode Who Shot Mr. Burns, Season 6, Episode 25, and Season 7, Episode 1, Maggie Simpson fires a gun directly into Burns's chest. He collapses onto the town sundial. He's hospitalized, and he recovers completely. No lasting damage, no physical decline. He walks out of the hospital and goes back to being the same tyrannical billionaire he was before the bullet entered his body. In the Season 11 episode The Mansion Family, Dr. Hibbert gives Burns a complete medical examination. The results are staggering. Burns has every single disease known to medical science, everyone. Cancer, heart disease, diabetes, tuberculosis, all of them, all at once, all simultaneously present in his body. And Dr. Hibbert explains this with a concept he calls Three Stooges syndrome. Every disease is trying to get through the door at the same time, and because they're all pushing at once, none of them can get through. They're all trapped in a permanent stalemate, each one blocking the others from killing him. Burns isn't healthy. He's the opposite of healthy. He's so catastrophically sick that the diseases have achieved a kind of biological equilibrium. Death can't claim him because death can't decide which disease gets to go first. Think about what that actually means outside of the joke. Burns's body is a war zone where hundreds of lethal conditions are waging permanent battle against each other, and the result is a stalemate. He's not surviving despite his illnesses, he's surviving because of them. Each disease prevents the others from progressing. His body has turned its own destruction into a self-sustaining defense mechanism. He can't die of cancer because the tuberculosis is fighting the cancer for resources. He can't die of heart disease because the liver disease is consuming the same cellular energy the heart disease needs. He is a walking medical impossibility, kept alive by the very things that should have killed him decades ago. And Burns doesn't just survive illness, he survives everything. He's been attacked by animals. He's been electrocuted, he's been buried under rubble, he's lost his entire fortune and rebuilt it from nothing. He's been kidnapped. He's been assaulted by Homer more times than anyone can count. He survived getting shot. He survives every single catastrophe the universe throws at him. And he never declines. His physical frailty is constant, yes. He can be knocked over by a strong breeze. But he never gets weaker, he never deteriorates. He's been the same degree of fragile since Season 1, and he's still standing in Season 37. His baseline never drops because his baseline is locked. Something is keeping him at exactly this level of functionality, preventing him from either improving or declining, and it has been doing so for well over a century. Now consider the nuclear power plant. Burns owns and operates Springfield's nuclear facility. He's been there since the plant was built. He's been exposed to radiation either directly or through proximity for decades. Every other person at the plant shows the effects. Homer's sperm count is canonically damaged by radiation, confirmed in Season 3, Episode 24, Brother, Can You Spare 2 Dimes? Blinky, the three-eyed fish, lives in the lake next to the plant, mutated by runoff. The plant leaks, it contaminates. Its safety record is catastrophic, which is the whole joke of Homer being the safety inspector. But Burns never shows radiation damage. He shows age, he shows frailty. but he never shows the specific cellular degradation that radiation causes. What if that's not a coincidence? What if Burns discovered decades ago, maybe even a century ago, that a specific level of radiation exposure was keeping his cellular structure in stasis? What if the entire reason he built the power plant wasn't to generate electricity for Springfield? What if it was to generate the specific frequency of radiation that sustains whatever process is keeping him alive? He's not running a business. He's running a life support system, and Springfield pays the electric bill. This reframes his most infamous scheme. In Who Shot Mr. Burns, Burns' grand plan is to build a giant disk that blocks out the sun over Springfield, forcing every resident to use his electricity permanently. The stated motive is greed. He wants to be the sole energy provider. But there's another motive that nobody discusses. Sunlight is the single greatest source of UV radiation that damages human cells and accelerates aging. An immortal being trying to maintain his cellular stasis would have one natural enemy: the sun. Burns didn't block out the sun to sell electricity. He blocked it out to eliminate the one source of cellular damage that his power plant's radiation couldn't counteract. He was trying to create the perfect environment for his own preservation. A town trapped in permanent darkness, powered by the same radiation that keeps him alive, with every citizen dependent on the system that sustains him. It's not a business model, it's an ecosystem designed around one man's immortality. And here's the detail that makes it impossible to dismiss. Burns has been on The Simpsons since the very first episode. The show has aired for 36 years. In all that time, every character has remained the same age because of the floating timeline. But Burns is the one character where that convention serves a double purpose. Everyone else stays the same age because the show requires it. Burns stays the same age because Burns has always been this age. He was ancient when the show started. He was ancient before television existed. He was ancient when his social security number was the second one ever issued. The floating timeline doesn't freeze Burns, it reveals him. He's the one character who was never subject to normal time in the first place. And somewhere in the basement of the Springfield nuclear power plant, behind doors that nobody but Burns and Smithers ever access, there's a reactor humming at a frequency that science doesn't have a name for, pumping out energy that doesn't show up on any meter, keeping one man tethered to a life that should have ended before anyone watching this video was born. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to a theory that reframes the entire Simpson family. Not as lovable idiots stumbling through life, but as something far more tragic. A family of geniuses who chose, one by one, generation by generation, to bury their own intelligence because being smart in Springfield is the worst thing you can be. The evidence starts with the most famous episode about Homer's brain, Season 12, Episode 9. It's called Homer takes a job as a human guinea pig at a medical testing center, and the doctors are baffled by how unintelligent he is. They run a 3D X-ray of his brain and notice something unusual sticking out of his right lobe. After rotating the scan, they identify it: a crayon, a single Crayola crayon that has been lodged in Homer's brain since he was 6 years old, when he shoved an entire 16-pack of crayons up his nose. He sneezed them out and assumed he'd gotten all of them. He hadn't. One stayed behind, pressing against his frontal lobe for decades, suppressing his cognitive function so severely that his IQ measured at 55. For context, the threshold for intellectual disability is generally considered to be around 70. Homer wasn't just dumb. He was clinically, medically, measurably impaired, and nobody ever noticed because Springfield doesn't notice things like that. The doctors tell Homer they can remove the crayon, it might kill him, or it might make him significantly more intelligent. Homer agrees. They extract the crayon and his IQ immediately jumps to 105, average, normal. And for one episode, Homer Simpson becomes the father he was always supposed to be. He reads books, he has meaningful conversations, he writes a comprehensive safety report about the Springfield nuclear power plant that is so thorough and so damning that the plant is temporarily shut down and every employee is laid off. He bonds with Lisa. They discuss philosophy, they share ideas, they connect as intellectual equals for the first time in their lives. And then everything falls apart. Homer's friends reject him. Moe burns him in effigy. Barney won't talk to him. Lenny and Carl treat him like a stranger. The smarter Homer gets, the more isolated he becomes. And then Lisa shows him something that breaks him, a graph, a simple line on a chart that shows, definitively, that as intelligence increases, happiness decreases. Lisa points to herself on the graph, the smartest Simpson, the most miserable person in the family. Homer looks at the graph, he looks at his daughter. He understands for the first time the deal that intelligence demands. You get to see the world clearly, and the price is that you see it alone. Homer goes to Moe, not for a beer, for a surgery. Moe, who describes himself as an unlicensed surgeon, performs what he calls the old Crayola oblongata. He puts the crayon back. Homer returns home, dumb again. Lisa is devastated. But then she finds a letter Homer wrote before the surgery. He tells her that he now understands what it's like to be smart like her, that he appreciates her more than he ever could before, and that he's sorry. When Homer walks into the room eating a sandwich, Lisa runs up and hugs him. Homer mistakes this for her wanting his food and pulls away. Then he says, "Oh, you want a hug?" And they embrace while Homer takes another bite of his sandwich and says, hug. That's the official episode, played for comedy with an emotional ending. But the implications are staggering. Homer Simpson was not born stupid. He was born with a normal IQ that was suppressed by an accident. And when that accident was reversed, he voluntarily chose to become stupid again because intelligence made him miserable and alone. Homer didn't lose his mind, he surrendered it. He looked at what being smart would cost him and decided the price was too high. And he's not the only Simpson who made that choice. Bart Simpson is canonically capable of brilliance. In Season 1, Episode 11, The Crepes of Wrath, Bart is sent to France as an exchange student and becomes fluent in French within weeks. Not conversational, fluent. He learns an entirely new language through immersion faster than most adults could with years of formal study. In multiple episodes, Bart demonstrates strategic thinking that rivals military planning. His pranks aren't impulsive, they're engineered. They require foresight, timing, understanding of human psychology, and the ability to predict how authority figures will respond. Bart isn't stupid, he's bored. He underperforms at school because school doesn't challenge him, and he's learned from watching Homer that intelligence leads to isolation. In future set episodes, Bart becomes a Supreme Court justice in one timeline. The kid who gets detention every week has the intellectual capacity to sit on the highest court in the country. He just chooses not to use it because using it means becoming Lisa. Maggie Simpson is potentially the most intelligent and most terrifying member of the family. She shot Mr. Burns with a handgun as an infant, not randomly. The final scene of that episode shows Maggie looking around to make sure nobody is watching, then mimicking gunshots with her pacifier, suggesting the shooting was intentional. Throughout the series, Maggie has escaped from daycare using elaborate planning. She's communicated through methods that shouldn't be available to a baby. She's demonstrated awareness and competence that children her age simply don't possess. Maggie hasn't chosen to suppress her intelligence yet because she hasn't learned to speak yet. She's the one Simpson whose genius is still fully active. She's pre-verbal, pre-socialized, pre-damaged. She hasn't yet learned the lesson that every other Simpson has internalized. Being smart in this family, in this town, is a curse. And then there's Lisa, the control group, the Simpson who refused to play dumb. Lisa is a vegetarian, a Buddhist, a saxophone prodigy, an environmental activist, and the most intellectually gifted child in Springfield. She's also perpetually lonely, chronically frustrated, and surrounded by people who either ignore or resent her. Lisa is what happens when a Simpson doesn't suppress their intelligence. She sees the world clearly. She understands the problems no one else can articulate. And she pays for it every single day with isolation, sadness, and the knowledge that the people she loves most will never truly understand her. Homer's graph doesn't lie. In the Simpson family, intelligence and happiness exist on opposite ends of a scale. Grandpa Abe was brilliant in his youth, a decorated World War II veteran who flew fighter planes and had remarkable adventures. Then he got old and forgot. Homer had a crayon. Bart chose chaos over scholarship. Maggie is still too young to choose. And Lisa, the one who chose knowledge, is the most alone. The Simpson genetic line produces extraordinary intelligence. And every generation finds a different way to bury it, not because they can't handle being smart, because Springfield can't handle them being smart. The town rewards stupidity, it punishes thought, it promotes the incompetent, and ignores the gifted. In a town like that, the smartest thing you can do is pretend you're not. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the most famous unsolved mystery in Simpsons history. And I don't mean unsolved in the fictional sense. The show gave us an answer. But the way they gave it, the contest they ran, the clues they planted, and the one person who actually figured it out and then vanished into the early internet, all of it suggests that the official answer might not be the whole truth. This is a story of who shot Mr. Burns. The setup takes place across Season 6, Episode 25, which aired on May 21st, 1995. It was the season finale, and it was one of the biggest television events of the decade. By this point in the episode, Mr. Burns has systematically destroyed every person in Springfield. He's stolen oil that the elementary school discovered, bankrupting the school and getting both groundskeeper Willie and music teacher Tito Puente fired. He's driven Moe's Tavern out of business by rerouting the oil well. He's permanently damaged Homer's spirit by refusing, despite 10 years of employment, to ever remember Homer's name. Homer spray paints "I am Homer Simpson" on Burns's office wall. And Burns still doesn't know who he is. The climax of Part 1 is Burns's most villainous act. He builds a giant disc that blocks out the sun over Springfield, shrouding the entire town in permanent darkness. At the emergency town meeting, the citizens are armed and furious. Burns arrives, taunts them, brandishes a gun he's been carrying since being attacked in his office by an unidentified assailant, which was Homer, and activates the sun blocker. As Burns walks away from town hall, laughing and humming to himself, he encounters someone. We don't see who. Burns says, "Oh, it's you. What are you so happy about?" He gasps, "I see." "I think you better drop it." "I said drop it." There's a struggle, a gunshot. Burns staggers out from behind town hall, clutching his chest. He refuses to answer a worried but unhelpful Jimbo's question about whether he's all right. He stumbles toward the town sundial and collapses onto it. His arms stretch out, his hands landing on the letters W and S. Dr. Hibbert looks at the viewer and says, "Well, I couldn't possibly solve this mystery. Can you?" The camera reveals he's actually pointing at Chief Wiggum. Fox turned this into a nationwide event. Viewers were invited to participate in a contest to guess who shot Mr. Burns. The winner would be animated into an actual episode of the show. 20 million people watched. The mystery consumed American pop culture for the entire summer of 1995. It was the biggest TV mystery event since Who Shot JR on Dallas 15 years earlier. Part 2 aired on September 17, 1995. As the Season 7 premiere, the investigation unfolds. Smithers initially believes he did it because he went home drunk and shot someone that night. But it turns out he shot Jasper Beardsley's wooden prosthetic leg, not Burns. Smithers is cleared because he was watching a show called Pardon My Zinger on Comedy Central at the exact time of the shooting, which Sideshow Mel remembers from a conversation at the town meeting. The police find DNA evidence on Burns's suit, an eyelash that belongs to a member of the Simpson family. They find a gun under the seat of Homer's car with Homer's fingerprints on it. Homer's arrested. He escapes from the police wagon when it tips over at the Krusty Burger drive-thru, which is exactly the kind of thing that happens in Springfield. Burns finally wakes up in the hospital. The first words out of his mouth are Homer Simpson. Everyone assumes he's naming his shooter, but it turns out Homer Simpson is literally all Burns can say. Then Burns recovers enough to identify the real culprit. He points at Maggie Simpson. He explains what happened. After the town meeting, he went to the parking lot and found Maggie alone in the Simpson car holding a lollipop. Burns, being Burns, decided to literally take candy from a baby. As they struggled over the lollipop, his gun slipped from its holster and fell into Maggie's hands. It discharged. The bullet hit Burns. The gun and lollipop fell under the car seat. Homer later found the gun while searching for an ice cream cone he'd dropped, leaving his fingerprints all over it. Case closed. Maggie shot Burns. Wiggum declares that no jury in the world would convict a baby, except maybe Texas. Everyone files out. Marge insists it was an accident, and then the camera holds on Maggie. She looks around the room. She makes sure nobody is watching. And she moves her pacifier in a way that mimics gunshots, suggesting in that one final moment that the shooting may not have been accidental at all. Now here's where this becomes genuinely unsettling. The The contest. Fox ran this massive promotional campaign. Guess who shot Burns? Win a chance to be animated on the show. Millions of entries poured in. And when it was over, not a single entry in the official contest correctly identified Maggie as the shooter. Not one. 0 correct answers out of millions of entries. Due to contest regulations, a winner still had to be selected from a random sample. Since that person didn't have the right answer, they were paid a cash prize instead of being animated on the show. Nobody was ever drawn into an episode. The promise of the contest went unfulfilled because America couldn't solve it. But someone did solve it. The DVD commentary reveals that the show's creators were aware of one person who posted the correct answer to a Simpsons newsgroup online on the night Part 1 aired. One person in the entire country. They figured it out from the clues in a single viewing and posted it on what was essentially a primitive internet forum. The creators wanted to contact this person, but they were forbidden from doing so while the contest was underway. When the contest ended and they tried to reach out, the person had used a college internet account. After the summer, the email address was no longer valid. They couldn't track the individual down. The one person who solved the mystery vanished into the early internet and was never found. The creators issued an invitation on the DVD release years later, asking this person to come forward and identify themselves. As of today, nobody ever has. The one person who cracked the biggest mystery in television history in 1995 remains anonymous. And the clues themselves are deliberately contradictory. The sundial seems definitive. Burns's hands point to W and S. Upside down, that's M and S Maggie Simpson. But Burns himself says in Part 2 that the position of his arms was purely coincidental. He wasn't pointing at anything. He was using his last strength to suck out his gold fillings and swallow them so paramedics couldn't steal them. The show's most iconic clue is canonically meaningless. The writers planted it, let the audience obsess over it, and then told you it was nothing. The alternate endings make it worse. To prevent leaks, the production team animated multiple conclusions showing different characters as the shooter. There was a full-length alternate ending where Smithers was the culprit, which aired in The Simpsons' 138th episode Spectacular. Troy McClure comments that the Smithers ending wouldn't have worked because it would require ignoring all the DNA evidence, which he calls downright nutty, a reference to the O.J. Simpson trial and his acquittal after the jury ignored the DNA evidence. The writers originally considered making Barney Gumble the shooter because they couldn't think of anything else to do with his character. They scrapped this idea, but Barney is notably the only suspect who is never questioned by Wiggum and never provides an alibi. The official answer is Maggie. The show has never wavered, but the clues contradict each other by design. The sundial meant nothing. The DNA was planted by coincidence. The gun ended up in the car through a slapstick chain of events, and the only person in the country who figured it out disappeared from the internet in 1995 and has never been heard from since. Who shot Mr. Burns? Maggie did, probably, unless the clues are telling a different story. A story the show planted but never finished. A story that one anonymous person on a college computer understood 30 years ago and took with them into silence. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to something that happened in Season 9 that broke The Simpsons in a way it never fully recovered from. An episode so controversial that the show's own creator reportedly called it one of the worst things the show ever produced. An episode that told the audience that a character they'd known and loved for 8 years was a complete fraud, and then told them to forget it ever happened. The episode is called The Principal and the Pauper. It's Season 9, Episode 2. It aired on September 28, 1997. And in 22 minutes, rewrote the entire history of one of Springfield's most prominent citizens. The setup seems innocent enough. The town is celebrating Principal Skinner's 20th anniversary at Springfield Elementary. Everything is warm and nostalgic, and then a man arrives, a stranger nobody recognizes. He says his name is Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner. The man the town has known as Principal Skinner for 2 decades is exposed as an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. He was a street punk, a petty criminal from Capital City who was drafted into the army during the Vietnam War. In Vietnam, Tamzarian served under the real Seymour Skinner, who became his mentor and the first person who ever believed in him. During a mission, the real Skinner was declared missing in action, presumed dead. Tamzarian returned home, and with nowhere else to go and nobody who cared if he existed, traveled to Springfield to deliver the news to Skinner's mother, Agnes. But Agnes assumed he was her son, and Tamzarian, desperate for a family, for an identity, for a life that meant something, didn't correct her. He became Seymour Skinner. He went to college, he became a teacher, he became principal. He lived as a dead man for 20 years, and nobody ever questioned it. When the real Skinner returns, the town initially accepts him. He takes over as principal. But the real Skinner is rigid, cold, and unlikable. The town misses the imposter, so they make a decision. A judge orders everyone in Springfield to never mention the incident again. The real Seymour Skinner is put on a train, chained to a freight car, and exiled from town. Armin Tamzarian resumes his stolen identity. The episode ends with a legal decree that erases the truth from Springfield's official record. The audience was furious, fans felt betrayed. An 8-year investment in a character was retroactively revealed to be built on a lie, and then the show told them to pretend it never happened. Matt Groening reportedly considered this one of the show's worst episodes. Harry Shearer, who voices Skinner, has expressed displeasure with the storyline. The writing community was divided. Some defended it as daring. Most considered it a mistake. But here's what nobody talks about. The episode was never retconned. Other controversial Simpsons storylines have been softened, amended, or quietly contradicted over the years. Not this one. Armin Tamzarian is still canon. The man running Springfield Elementary in every episode since 1997 is still officially a former criminal living under a stolen identity. The show mocked its own audience for caring and then enforced the joke by never taking it back. And the implications extend far beyond one character. If the principal of the town's elementary school is a fraud, and the entire town collectively agreed to suppress that information through a legal order, what else has Springfield agreed to forget? The town didn't just overlook one lie, they institutionalized it. A judge used the power of the court to mandate collective amnesia. The real victim, the real Seymour Skinner, was literally exiled, chained to a train, and removed from the community. Not because he did anything wrong, because his existence was inconvenient. Springfield's relationship with truth isn't passive, it's aggressive. The town doesn't just ignore uncomfortable facts, it punishes them. It removes people who threaten comfortable fictions. It uses its institutions, courts, police, and schools to enforce the version of reality that requires the least effort to maintain. Armin Tamzarian didn't just steal one man's identity. He proved that in Springfield, identity itself is negotiable. You are whoever the town agrees you are. And if the truth shows up on a train one day, the town will put the truth on a different train and send it away. The meta layer is the most disturbing part. The Simpsons, a show built on satirizing American denial, committed the exact sin it spent 8 seasons mocking. The writers buried an uncomfortable truth and told the audience to pretend it never happened. The show that held a mirror up to America's worst instincts looked in that mirror and saw itself. And then it smashed the mirror and swept up the glass and told everyone the mirror never existed under penalty of law. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Now let's talk about something the show has been telling us since the very first season, but nobody connected the dots on until you lay all the evidence side by side. Homer Simpson works at a nuclear power plant. He has worked there for over 30 years. He is the safety inspector, which means he is the single person most responsible for ensuring that radiation doesn't leak into the environment. And he is spectacularly, historically, almost supernaturally bad at his job. The Springfield nuclear power plant has been contaminating the town since before the show started. The evidence of mutation is everywhere. And the the Simpson family, is ground zero. Start with the most basic fact. Homer's exposure to radiation has canonically damaged his reproductive system. In Season 3, Episode 24, Brother Can You Spare 2 Dimes, the Springfield nuclear power plant gives Homer a company physical. The results reveal that his sperm count is dangerously low, directly caused by radiation exposure at the plant. Mr. Burns immediately recognizes that this information could expose the plant to millions of dollars in lawsuits, so he covers it up. He invents a fake award called the First Annual Montgomery Burns Award for Outstanding Achievement in the Field of Excellence. He gives Homer a trophy and a $2,000 check. Homer signs a waiver without reading it, believing he's won a legitimate honor. The radiation damage is buried. Homer never learns the truth, and the plant keeps leaking. But Homer's damaged DNA doesn't just affect his sperm count, it affects his children. Think about the 3 Simpson children. Bart is hyperactive, impulsive, and demonstrates cognitive patterns that don't fit any normal developmental profile. He's capable of genius-level strategic thinking, but can't focus in a classroom. Lisa is intellectually gifted to a degree that is statistically anomalous, a saxophone prodigy, a Buddhist philosopher, an environmental scientist, all at age 8. Her intelligence isn't just above average, it's so far outside the normal curve that it qualifies as a mutation in its own right. And Maggie, a baby who can fire a handgun accurately, who has escaped from secured facilities, who demonstrates awareness and capability that no infant should possess. 3 children, 3 wildly different manifestations of abnormal development, all born to a man whose DNA has been irradiated for decades. The town itself shows signs of contamination. The most obvious is Blinky, the 3-eyed fish who lives in the lake adjacent to the power plant. Blinky first appears in Season 2, Episode 4, 2 cars in every garage and 3 eyes on every fish. That episode is literally about the environmental contamination from the plant. Blinky is a mutant, a fish born with a 3rd eye because the water it lives in is toxic. And that's just the mutation we can see. What about the mutations we can't? What about the mutations that don't manifest as extra eyes but as altered brain chemistry, enhanced durability, or inexplicable survival capabilities? Because Homer survives things that should kill him, not occasionally, constantly. In every single season, he has fallen into Springfield Gorge multiple times, including the original fall in Season 2 where he bounces off the cliff face, is loaded into an ambulance, and then the ambulance crashes and he falls into the gorge again. He has been electrocuted, shot, run over, blown up, poisoned, crushed, and set on fire. In Season 2, Episode 11, One Fish 2. Fish, blowfish, bluefish, Homer eats improperly prepared fugu, a pufferfish that contains a lethal toxin. Dr. Hibbert tells him he has 24 hours to live. Homer makes a list of things he wants to do before he dies. He says goodbye to his family. He prepares for the end. And then he doesn't die. The toxin just doesn't kill him. The episode plays this as a miracle, a heartwarming reprieve. But what if it wasn't a miracle? What if Homer's body, saturated with decades of radiation, has developed a resistance to toxins that normal human biology doesn't possess? Consider the crayon again from a different angle. A crayon has been lodged in Homer's brain since he was 6 years old, a foreign object pressing against neural tissue for over 30 years. In any normal human being, this would cause infection, inflammation, brain damage, seizures, and eventually death. The brain doesn't tolerate foreign objects, it attacks them, it swells around them, it dies. But Homer's brain didn't die, it adapted. It grew around the crayon, it incorporated the foreign body into its neural architecture and continued functioning, albeit at reduced capacity. That's not normal brain tissue. Normal brain tissue would have killed Homer at age 7. Homer's brain tissue is something else, something that can absorb foreign objects and continue operating. Something that has been altered at the cellular level by years of radiation exposure, making it more resilient, more adaptive, and more resistant to damage than any brain has a right to be. The nuclear plant isn't just Homer's workplace, it's the origin story of the entire Simpson family. Homer's radiation exposure didn't just lower his sperm count, it rewrote his genetic code. And that rewritten code was passed to his children, each one manifesting the mutation differently. Bart's hyperactivity and strategic brilliance, Lisa's extreme intelligence, Maggie's impossible competence. They're not just the children of a nuclear power plant worker, they're the products of mutated DNA, 3 different expressions of the same genetic corruption, each one a variation on what happens when irradiated human DNA tries to reproduce. And the town doesn't notice because the town is contaminated too. Springfield's water supply is connected to the same lake where Blinky swims. The air circulates past the same cooling towers. Every resident of Springfield has been breathing, drinking, and bathing in low-level contamination for decades. That's why nobody in Springfield acts normally. That's why the town produces an impossible number of geniuses, criminals, lunatics, and anomalies per capita. That's why a man can fall into a gorge and walk away. That's why a baby can fire a gun. That's why a 10-year-old can speak fluent French. The entire population is mutated, not dramatically, not visibly, but enough that the baseline for normal in Springfield is wildly different from the baseline for normal anywhere else. Dr. Hibbert knows. He's been the family physician for the entire series. He runs tests, he performs exams, he sees the results, and he never does anything about it. He laughs. That's his response to every medical anomaly, every impossible survival, every test result that should trigger a CDC investigation. He laughs and moves on because Dr. Hibbert isn't incompetent. He's compliant. He understands that Springfield's medical baseline is different from everywhere else, and he understands that acknowledging this would shut down the power plant, bankrupt the town, and expose an environmental catastrophe that would make national news. So he laughs, he treats the symptoms, he documents nothing, and the mutations continue generation after generation while the reactor hums and the water glows and the fish grow extra eyes and nobody asks why. The Simpsons aren't America's average family. They never were. They're America's first nuclear family in the most literal sense of the word, born, raised, and mutated in the shadow of a reactor that should have been shut down before Bart was conceived. Their quirks aren't character traits, they're symptoms. And Springfield, the town that can't be found on any map, might not be hidden because of a running gag. It might be hidden because finding it would reveal the worst environmental cover-up in American history. An entire town irradiated for decades, producing mutant after mutant, while the owner of the plant sits in his office, 130 years old, sustained by the same radiation that's destroying everyone else. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the phenomenon that made The Simpsons the most discussed show on the internet every time something happens in the real world. The predictions. The seemingly impossible ability of a cartoon from the 1990s to depict events that wouldn't happen for decades. Trump's presidency, smartwatches, video calling. The question everyone asks is how. But the real question, the one that actually matters, is whether The Simpsons are predicting the future at all, or whether they're revealing something much more disturbing about the present. Let's start with the facts, the verified predictions, not the viral screenshots, not the doctored images, not the fan edits. The real ones that actually happened in real episodes that actually aired before the events they supposedly predicted. The most famous is the Trump presidency. In Season 11, Episode 17, an episode called Bart to the Future that aired on March 19, 2000, Lisa Simpson is shown as the President of the United States. She explicitly says she has inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump. This aired 16 years before Donald Trump won the 2016 presidential election. The show depicted a Trump presidency as a cautionary tale, a failed administration that left the country in financial ruin, and it did so when Trump was primarily known as a real estate developer and reality TV personality, not as a political figure. This one is real, this one is verified, and this one genuinely has no simple explanation because in 2000, the idea of Donald Trump becoming president was treated as absurd even by the show's own writers. The Cypress Hill prediction is another verified one. In Season 7, Episode 24, Homer Palooza, which aired in 1996, there's a joke about the hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally booking the London Symphony Orchestra while under the influence. This was a throwaway gag. Nobody thought about it again. Then in 2024, 28 years later, Cypress Hill actually performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at Royal Albert Hall. A joke written in the mid-1990s became reality nearly 3 decades later. The Super Bowl prediction is often overlooked, but it's one of the most statistically improbable. In Season 3, Episode 14, Lisa the Greek, which aired on January 23, 1992, just days before Super Bowl 26, Lisa correctly predicts that the Washington Redskins would beat the Buffalo Bills. The episode was then redubbed for repeat airings in subsequent years, changing the prediction to match that year's Super Bowl teams. The Dallas Cowboys over the Bills, that came true. The Cowboys over the Bills again, that came true too. The San Francisco 49ers over the San Diego Chargers, that also came true. The show correctly predicted at least 4 consecutive Super Bowl outcomes through reruns of a single episode. Now here's where honesty becomes important and where most content about Simpsons predictions fails. A huge number of viral Simpsons predicted this claims are either doctored, misattributed, or based on post hoc reasoning. The so-called smartwatch prediction is a joke about the Apple Newton, a real device that existed in 1993 and was notorious for its terrible handwriting recognition. The show didn't predict smartwatches, it mocked a product that already existed. The Simpsons predicted FaceTime claim refers to video calling, which had appeared in science fiction for decades before The Simpsons existed. Video phones were in the Jetsons in 1962. The Simpsons didn't predict anything. They referenced a concept that had been in popular culture for 30 years. Snopes, the fact-checking organization, has debunked many of the claimed prophecies. Their assessment is straightforward. The show's extensive run, over 790 episodes across 37 seasons, means thousands of jokes, thousands of cultural references, and thousands of opportunities for coincidence. When you throw enough darts, you hit some bullseyes. Al Jean, the longtime showrunner, has said exactly this. If you throw enough darts, you're going to get some bullseyes. Bill Oakley, a producer, said, "There are very few cases where The Simpsons predicted something. It's mainly just coincidence because the episodes are so old that history repeats itself." And that last phrase is the key. History repeats itself. The Simpsons doesn't predict the future. The Simpsons documents the present so accurately, so thoroughly, and so specifically that when the future inevitably repeats the patterns of the past, the show appears prophetic. The writers in the 1990s looked at American culture and saw a country obsessed with celebrity, addicted to technology, politically divided, environmentally reckless, and economically unstable. They satirized those tendencies, they exaggerated them, they followed them to their logical conclusions. And 30 years later, when American culture continued doing exactly what it had always been doing, the satire looked like prophecy. The Trump prediction isn't magic. It's pattern recognition. In 2000, the idea of a celebrity businessman with no political experience becoming president seemed absurd enough to be a punchline. But the cultural forces that would eventually make it happen were already visible. The merger of entertainment and politics, the rise of reality television as a legitimate cultural force, the erosion of the boundary between fame and authority. The writers saw the trajectory and extrapolated. They didn't predict that Trump specifically would become president. They predicted that someone like Trump eventually would, and they were right, not because they could see the future, but because they could see the present clearly enough to know where it was heading. This is what makes the prediction phenomenon genuinely unsettling, not the accuracy, the implication. A cartoon from the 1990s can describe America in the 2020s because nothing fundamentally changed. The same corporate greed, the same political dysfunction, the same technological obsession, the same environmental negligence, the same cultural decay. The Simpsons satirized all of it 3 decades ago, and 3 decades later, every single one of those jokes still lands. Not because the writers were visionaries, because America is stuck. Running the same patterns, repeating the same mistakes, following the same trajectories that were visible to anyone paying attention in 1996. The predictions aren't the impressive part. The impressive part is that we're surprised by them. The Simpsons told us exactly where we were heading. We laughed, changed the channel, and drove straight into the punchline. And every time a new prediction comes true, every time a 20-year-old joke becomes reality, the show isn't saying, "We told you so." It's asking a much harder question. Why didn't you listen? Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to one of the strangest and most overlooked mysteries in the entire Simpsons universe. A character who has died more times than anyone can count, in more ways than anyone can catalog, and who keeps appearing in subsequent episodes as though nothing happened. His name is Hans Moleman. And if you've been watching The Simpsons casually, you probably know him as the sad little old man who shows up for 3 seconds, gets injured or killed, and disappears. But if you've been paying attention, if you've been tracking his appearances across 37 seasons, you know that Hans Moleman doesn't just die often. He dies constantly, violently, graphically, and he always comes back, not through time travel, not through dream sequences, not through any mechanism the show has ever explained. Hans Moleman dies and then exists again. And The Simpsons has never, not once, acknowledged this as unusual. The deaths are not subtle. Hans Moleman has been buried alive. He's been drilled through the skull. He's been set on fire. He's been crushed by vehicles, buildings, and falling objects. He's been run over by cars. He's been eaten. He's fallen into pits, off cliffs, and through floors. In one episode, he's strapped to a gurney and wheeled into a crematorium while still alive, screaming that he's not dead yet. In another, his head explodes. In another, he's dissolved in acid. Each death is played for a quick laugh, a moment of dark comedy that the episode immediately moves past without comment. And in the next episode, or sometimes later in the same episode, Hans Moleman is back. Walking through Springfield, same glasses, same hunch, same blank expression, as though he never died. The show has never explained this. There is no canonical mechanism for Moleman's resurrections. He doesn't have a time machine. He's not a robot. He's not explicitly supernatural. He's just a small, sad, elderly man who keeps dying and keeps coming back, and nobody in Springfield finds this remarkable in any way. And then there's the detail that changes everything. Hans Moleman claims to be 31 years old. This is stated in the show. He says he's 31. He looks 80. He moves like a man in his 90s. His body is hunched. His vision is terrible. His hearing is nearly gone, and his physical capabilities are those of someone who has been alive for close to a century. But he says he's 31. Either Hans Moleman is lying about his age, which seems unlikely given that he has no reason to lie and no apparent capacity for deception, or something aged him catastrophically. Something took a 31-year-old man and turned him into what looks like an 80-year-old overnight. What could do that? Radiation could. Chemical exposure could. Living underground in conditions inhospitable to human biology could. And this is where the fan theory enters and where it gets genuinely creepy. The theory proposes that Hans Moleman is not one person. Hans Moleman is a designation, a label given to whichever member of an underground species is currently operating on the surface of Springfield. When one Moleman dies, another one surfaces. They all look identical because they're genetically similar, produced by the same underground colony. They all act confused because the surface world is foreign to them. They all seem old because whatever environment they come from ages them rapidly when exposed to sunlight and open air. And Springfield treats them as one person because Springfield can't tell them apart and doesn't care enough to try. Springfield has extensive subterranean infrastructure. Tunnels run under the town. The sewers are vast and frequently depicted. Caves, underground rivers, and hidden passages appear in multiple episodes. The town was built on top of something, and whatever that something is, it's still down there. Moleman's name itself is suggestive. Mole? Man. A man who is a mole, a creature that lives underground and only surfaces when it has to. His name isn't a coincidence, it's a description. Every time a moleman surfaces, he's confused. He doesn't understand traffic patterns. He doesn't grasp social norms. He walks into dangerous situations without recognizing the danger. He's perpetually lost, perpetually bewildered, perpetually out of place. Because he is out of place, he's not from Springfield, he's from below Springfield. He's a visitor from a subterranean world, briefly emerging into daylight before the surface world kills him, as it always does, and the colony sends another one up. The fact that nobody in Springfield acknowledges the Moleman cycle is the most telling evidence. In any normal town, a man who dies and reappears would be front-page news. In Springfield, nobody notices, nobody comments, nobody investigates. Either the entire town is so desensitized to death that they've stopped tracking individual fatalities, or they know about the Molemen and have collectively agreed to pretend they don't exist. Given what we know about Springfield's relationship with inconvenient truths, given the Armin-Tamzarian precedent, the latter seems more likely. Springfield knows something lives beneath their streets. They know it surfaces sometimes. They know it dies. They know another one replaces it. And they've decided, as a community, that this is not their problem. Hans Moleman isn't a character, he's a species. A colony of underground beings who surface one at a time, get killed by a world they don't understand, and get replaced by the next one in line. His 31-year age claim isn't a lie. It's accurate. Each Moleman is young when it surfaces. The aging happens in hours, not decades, as surface conditions rapidly deteriorate biology that was designed for underground living. By the time a moleman has been above ground for a day, he looks like he's been alive for a century. By the time the surface world kills him, he's already dying of exposure. The death is just faster, and the colony keeps sending them up. Why? Because they're trying to understand the surface. They're trying to learn about the world above them. Every moleman that surfaces, every confused little man who wanders into traffic or stumbles into a construction site is a scout, an ambassador from below, sent to observe, sent to gather information, and every single time, Springfield kills the messenger without ever receiving the message. The underground colony has been trying to make contact for 37 seasons, and Springfield has responded by running them over with cars and not noticing. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Now for the final theory, the one that ties everything together, the one that takes the scariest element of The Simpsons, the annual Halloween specials, and asks a question that the show has spent 35 years telling you not to ask. What if the Treehouse of Horror episodes are real? Every year since 1990, The Simpsons has aired a special Halloween episode. The format is always the same, 3 short segments, each telling a separate horror story involving the Simpson family. The stories are wild. Homer gets cloned, Lisa develops telekinesis, Bart gets killed by Sideshow Bob and then brought back to life. Zombies overrun Springfield. The family gets abducted by aliens. The town experiences a biblical apocalypse. Homer sells his soul for a donut. Kang and Kodos run for president. The stories push every boundary the regular show won't touch. Characters die permanently within the segments. Gore, violence, and genuine horror replace the usual comedy. And every year, the show tells you the same thing. These episodes don't count. They're non-canon. Nothing you see in a Treehouse of Horror episode has any bearing on the regular Simpsons continuity. Except that's not entirely true, and the evidence has been accumulating for 35 years. Start with Kang and Kodos. These 2 alien characters were introduced in the very first Treehouse of Horror in 1990. They're tentacled extraterrestrials from the planet Rigel 7, who have a recurring obsession with the Simpson family. In the Treehouse episodes, they invade Earth, impersonate political candidates, attempt to breed with humans, and generally terrorize Springfield. Standard Halloween fare. But Kang and Kodos also appear in regular non-Halloween episodes. They show up in canon. They exist in the main Simpsons timeline. If Treehouse of Horror episodes are truly non-canon, separate from the real continuity, then characters who originated in those episodes should not exist outside of them. Yet Kang and Kodos do. They appear in normal episodes. They're referenced in normal conversations. Their existence is acknowledged by characters who, according to the show's own rules, should have no knowledge of them. Either the show is breaking its own canon rules for a recurring joke, or the boundary between the Halloween episodes and the regular timeline is more porous than anyone admits. This isn't the only bleed through. Themes, concepts, and ideas that first appear in Treehouse of Horror segments have a way of showing up in regular episodes later. The show introduced the concept of multiple parallel universes in a Treehouse of Horror segment years before it became a plot device in regular episodes. Characters who die in Halloween specials sometimes behave differently in subsequent regular episodes, as though they carry some residual memory of events that officially never happened. The show's willingness to kill characters in Treehouse episodes has gradually expanded into the regular show, with character deaths becoming more frequent and more permanent in recent seasons. The wall between canon and non-canon isn't just porous, it's eroding. Season 33 provided the most dramatic evidence yet, a 2-part episode called A Serious Flanders. This story plays out like a prestige crime drama. Ned Flanders becomes involved with the Springfield Mafia. Characters are killed. The tone is dark, violent, and genuinely unsettling. The storytelling is indistinguishable from what you'd expect in a Treehouse of Horror segment. But A Serious Flanders isn't a Halloween special, it's canon. It aired as a regular 2-part episode. And it was critically acclaimed, with reviewers calling it the best Simpsons story in years. What A Serious Flanders proved is that the show no longer needs the Treehouse of Horror framework to tell dark stories. The darkness has migrated from the Halloween episodes into the regular season. The containment has failed. The horror that was supposed to stay in the treehouse has escaped into the main narrative. And the show is allowing it to happen because the audience has changed, the culture has changed, and the stories that used to require a disclaimer now feel appropriate for a Tuesday night. But here's the theory that goes further. What if the Treehouse of Horror episodes were never truly non-canon? What if they're not alternate realities or what-if scenarios or harmless Halloween fun? What if they're windows into parallel dimensions that exist alongside the main Springfield, running concurrently, invisible most of the year, but briefly visible during Halloween when the dimensional barriers thin? The Simpsons has canonically established that parallel dimensions exist. In the regular series episode Treehouse of Horror, no wait. Actually, it's in the Treehouse episodes themselves that parallel dimensions are most thoroughly explored. But the concept bleeds into canon through characters like Professor Frink, who routinely references multiverse theory, and through episodes that deal with time travel, alternate timelines, and reality manipulation. If parallel dimensions exist in the Simpsons universe, and the show has repeatedly confirmed they do, then the Treehouse of Horror dimensions exist too. They're not fantasies, they're real places, real timelines, real Springfields where the horror actually happened. Every year at Halloween, the membrane between these dimensions weakens, and The Simpsons, whether intentionally or not, broadcasts what it sees. The zombie outbreak from Treehouse of Horror 3 isn't fiction, it happened in a parallel Springfield. Homer's deal with the devil isn't a spooky story, it happened in a dimension where Satan runs a donut shop. The alien invasion from Treehouse of Horror 2 isn't imagination, it's a documentary from a reality where Kang and Kodos succeeded. And those realities keep bleeding through. Kang and Kodos appear in canon because they've crossed the dimensional barrier. Treehouse themes appear in regular episodes because the boundaries are weakening. A serious Flanders happened because the show can no longer maintain the fiction that horror is something that only visits Springfield once a year. The horror has always been there, running parallel, just out of sight. And every Halloween for 35 years, the show has given you a glimpse of what exists on the other side of the wall. The annual Treehouse of Horror isn't a break from the real Simpsons, it's the truest version of the show. The version where consequences are permanent, where death is real, where the darkness that Springfield suppresses every other day of the year finally gets to show its face. And when the episode ends and the credits roll and the regular show resumes, the darkness doesn't disappear. It goes back behind the wall, it waits, and next October, when the barriers thin again, it comes back, exactly where you left it, exactly as hungry as before. The Simpsons has told us for 35 years that Treehouse of Horror doesn't count, that it's all pretend, that the real Springfield is the safe one, the funny one, the one where Homer falls down and everybody laughs. But the evidence bleeds through. Characters cross over, themes repeat, the violence escalates, the darkness seeps into the regular show more with every passing season. And maybe the reason the show keeps insisting that these episodes aren't real is because acknowledging that they are would mean acknowledging that Springfield isn't a comedy. It never was. It's a horror show that airs 52 weeks a year, and for 51 of those weeks, everyone agrees to pretend the monsters aren't there. But they're there. They've always been there. Behind the wall, behind the annual disclaimer, behind the floating timeline and the yellow skin and the four-fingered hands and the town that can't be found on any map. Springfield is a town that erases its own history, that exiles inconvenient truths, that mandates collective amnesia through court orders, that watches a man die every week and never asks why he keeps coming back. That can't agree on what state it's in because it might not exist in any state at all. Where the principal is an imposter, the power plant is a mutant factory, the richest man alive is literally immortal. And the main character might have been dreaming the whole thing from a hospital bed since 1993. The Simpsons isn't a sitcom, it's an SCP, a containment file for a reality that shouldn't exist. Broadcast weekly for the entertainment of an audience that doesn't realize they're watching a documentary about a town that went wrong at a fundamental, molecular, possibly interdimensional level. And every time you tune in, every time you laugh at Homer falling down, every time you watch Bart write on the chalkboard, every time the couch gag plays and the theme song starts and the family gathers in front of the television that looks exactly like your television, you're not watching fiction. You're watching Springfield, the real Springfield, the one that can't be found, the one that changes shape, the one that forgets what it's supposed to remember and remembers what it's supposed to forget. the one where the water is contaminated and the fish have 3 eyes, and the principal has a stolen name, and the mayor is corrupt, and the police are incompetent, and the richest man alive blocks out the sun because he can. The one where a baby shoots a billionaire and nobody goes to jail. Where an entire town agrees to pretend a man is someone he's not because the truth is too inconvenient to process. Where a man can live in a coma for 30 years and nobody pulls the plug because the dream is more entertaining than the reality. That's Springfield, that's The Simpsons. And somewhere underneath it, in tunnels nobody mapped, a colony of mole men is sending another scout to the surface, wondering why the previous one never came back. He won't come back either. None of them ever do. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell icon, and I'll see you in the next one. Actually, wait. We're not done yet. There's more to uncover. Let's go deeper into some of these mysteries because the surface level barely scratches what the show has hidden in plain sight for decades. Let's go back to Homer's coma for a second because there's a layer of evidence that most people miss entirely. The conversation between Homer and God and Homer the heretic isn't just notable for the 6-month prediction, it's notable for what God looks like. In that episode when Homer meets God, God has 5 fingers on each hand. Every other character in The Simpsons has 4 fingers. This is a deliberate artistic choice that has been consistent since the show's first episode. 4 fingers, every character, every time. Except God. God has 5 fingers. Now here's why this matters. If Homer is dreaming the entire show after his coma, then every character in his dream is a projection of his own mind. They all have 4 fingers because Homer has 4 fingers and his unconscious mind can only generate characters that mirror his own physical template. But God, the one entity in Homer's dream that exists outside Homer's understanding, the one being that Homer's mind can't fully simulate because it represents something beyond comprehension, has a different physical form, 5 fingers. God doesn't look like everyone else because God isn't part of the dream. God is the intrusion. The one signal from outside the coma that Homer's sleeping brain can't fully process, so it renders God as something slightly wrong, slightly different, slightly more real than everything else in the simulation. Fans on Reddit actually caught this detail. One commenter pointed out that if God has 5 fingers and 5 fingers are the real-world human norm, then God might be a projection of actual reality bleeding into Homer's coma dream. Doctors have 5 fingers, nurses have 5 fingers. The people standing around Homer's hospital bed in the real world all have 5 fingers. And Homer's unconscious mind, which can hear ambient sound and process external stimuli, translated one of those real-world presences into his dream as God. The entity with 5 fingers isn't a divine being, it's Homer's brain trying to represent the surgeon or the nurse or the family member who is actually there, in the real hospital, leaning over his coma body. And when that figure told Homer he'd die in 6 months, it wasn't a prophecy, it was a prognosis. A doctor speaking near Homer's bed, telling the family that Homer had 6 months to live. Homer's sleeping brain heard it and incorporated it into the dream as a conversation with God. That means the coma theory doesn't just explain the show's escalating absurdity. It explains the show's most intimate spiritual moment. Homer's relationship with God, one of the most genuinely touching, recurring elements in the series, is actually his relationship with the medical staff keeping him alive. Every time Homer talks to God, he's hearing reality. And reality keeps telling him things he doesn't want to hear. Now let's go even deeper on Mr. Burns because there's a whole dimension to his immortality that connects to the darkest corners of the show's mythology. Burns doesn't just survive things, he has survived specific historical events that the show references with enough detail to construct a timeline. And that timeline is impossible. Burns once had a teddy bear named Bobo. The episode Rosebud from Season 5 traces Bobo's journey through history. We see Bobo with Burns as a small child. The show places this in the early 20th century based on the visual design and historical context. Bobo then passes to Charles Lindbergh in 1927, then to Adolf Hitler in his Berlin bunker in 1945. Then Bobo drifts through the Arctic, frozen in ice, until it surfaces in Springfield in the present day. This means Burns was a child somewhere around 1905 to 1915, making him, conservatively, well over 100 years old in the present timeline. But it gets darker. Burns doesn't just remember being a child in the early 1900s. He remembers specific events with the clarity of someone who is actively participating in them. He references the sinking of the Titanic. He speaks about the Spanish flu. He references prohibition not as history but as personal inconvenience. He treats the Great Depression as a period he navigated strategically, not something he read about. His wealth didn't begin with the power plant. It existed before the power plant, before Social Security, before the modern federal government. Burns' fortune is old money in the truest possible sense, money that predates the systems designed to track money. And his vulnerability, his famous physical frailty, is itself suspicious. Burns can be knocked over by a newspaper. He needs Smithers to perform basic physical tasks. He weighs next to nothing. His bones are apparently hollow. He is the most physically fragile character in Springfield. But he never dies from this frailty. He doesn't deteriorate. He doesn't worsen. He is exactly as frail in season 37 as he was in season 1. His body isn't declining. It's stable. It reached a point of maximum fragility decades ago, possibly a century ago, and it stopped, like a system that hit its minimum viable threshold and locked in place. This is consistent with radiation-based preservation. If Burns' immortality is sustained by nuclear radiation from his power plant, then his body would be in a constant state of cellular replacement, old cells dying, new cells generated by the radiation. But the replacement wouldn't be perfect. Each generation of replacement cells would be slightly less robust than the last, converging toward a minimum. Burns reached that minimum sometime in the early 20th century and has been hovering there ever since. Too fragile to be fully functional, too preserved to actually die. A man running on backup power, literally sustained by the hum of a reactor he built for exactly this purpose. The Three Stooges syndrome isn't just a joke. It's the show's way of telling you that Burns' biology doesn't follow normal rules. Every disease trying to kill him simultaneously and failing, because they're all in competition. That's not medicine, that's ecology. That's the description of a biological ecosystem, a body where diseases have become part of the operating system, each one performing a function that prevents the others from succeeding, creating a stable equilibrium that mimics health without actually being healthy. Burns isn't alive in the way you and I are alive. He's alive the way a nuclear reactor is alive, generating energy, producing waste, operating within parameters too dangerous to shut down and too stable to fail. Now let's circle back to Springfield's geography because there's a connection between the impossible location and everything else we've discussed that nobody talks about. Springfield can't be found on a map. Its geography changes between episodes. Its state has never been named. Its borders are impossible. Its zip code is a joke. And every time someone tries to pin down where it is, the answer slips away. What if Springfield can't be found because Springfield isn't supposed to be found? Not as a running gag, as a containment measure. Think about everything we've discussed. A town where the nuclear power plant has been contaminating the water supply for decades, where the richest man alive is functionally immortal, where the principal is living under a stolen identity, where the entire population shows signs of genetic mutation, where a subterranean species sends representatives to the surface who die and get replaced without anyone noticing, where a man has been in a coma since 1993 and nobody is pulling the plug. If Springfield were a real place, and if even a fraction of these things were true, the federal government would have quarantined it decades ago. The EPA would have descended on the nuclear plant. The CDC would have investigated the mutation rate. The FBI would have looked into the identity fraud. The town would be evacuated, fenced off, and classified. Springfield's location isn't hidden as a joke. It's hidden because Springfield is a containment zone, a place the government knows about but pretends doesn't exist. A town that was deliberately removed from maps, not because of a bureaucratic oversight, but because putting it on a map would mean acknowledging what's happening there. And acknowledging what's happening there would mean explaining why nobody stopped it. Remember what happened in the episode E Pluribus Vigum. Actually, let's go back even further. In the very premise of the show, Springfield was founded by a pirate using a fake name after misreading the Bible. The town's entire existence is based on fraud. It was never a legitimate settlement. It was an accident created by a criminal, populated by people who followed a con man into the wilderness, and built on land that nobody else wanted. Springfield didn't become dysfunctional, it was born dysfunctional. The corruption isn't a bug, it's the foundation. And the show has given us one more piece of evidence that ties everything together. In Season 6, Episode 25, the Who Shot Mr. Burns episode, after Burns blocks out the sun and the town descends into outrage, Dr. Hibbert turns to the camera and says, "Well, I couldn't possibly solve this mystery, can you?" The camera pulls back to reveal he's pointing at Chief Wiggum. But for one moment, just one frame, it looks like he's pointing at the viewer. And maybe he is, maybe Dr. Hibbert, the man who knows more about Springfield's medical abnormalities than anyone, the man who laughs when he should be alarmed, the man who documents nothing and treats everything as normal, is asking us a different question entirely. Not who shot Mr. Burns, not can you solve this mystery, but can you see what I see? Can you see the mutations, the immortality, the coma, the underground species, the impossible geography, the contaminated water, the stolen identities, the erased histories? Can you see Springfield for what it really is? We can. We just spent 2 hours proving it. And Springfield, the town that can't be found, the town that changes shape, the town that forgets its own secrets, just sat there the whole time, yellow-skinned and four-fingered, laughing at us for taking this long to notice. That's the real mystery of The Simpsons. Not where Springfield is, not who shot Mr. Burns, not whether Homer's dreaming. The real mystery is how a show told us everything, hid nothing, broadcast every secret in prime time for 36 years, and we still treated it like a cartoon. It was never a cartoon, it was always a warning. And the warning is this: every town is Springfield, every power plant is leaking, every principal has a secret, every family is mutated by the world they live in. Every truth gets exiled on a train because it's easier to pretend. And every person you pass on the street might be 31 years old, might look 80, might have come from somewhere you can't imagine, and might not be here tomorrow. But another one will take their place. They always do. That's The Simpsons. That's Springfield. That's 2 hours of disturbing theories and unsolved mysteries. And somewhere, in a hospital bed that nobody visits anymore, Homer Simpson is still dreaming. Still four-fingered, still yellow, still alive, technically. And the dream, the one that started when a vending machine fell on a man who was already broken, is still going, season after season after season. The longest coma in television history, broadcast weekly for an audience that doesn't know they're watching a man die slowly while the world moves on without him. God said 6 months, it's been 33 years, and the machines are still beeping, and the dream is still playing, and nobody is pulling the plug. Because the dream is too good, and the ratings are too high, and the show must go on, even if the dreamer never wakes up. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave a comment with which theory disturbed you the most, and I'll see you in the next one. But actually, hold on. Before we go, let me take you through a few more layers of these theories that I didn't fully unpack. Because once you see the connections between these mysteries, you realize they aren't separate theories at all. They're pieces of one massive interconnected puzzle that the show has been building for 36 years. And when you put the pieces together, the picture they form is something nobody expected. Let's start by connecting the coma theory to the prediction phenomenon. If Homer has been in a coma since April 1993, and his brain processes ambient sounds from the hospital room and weaves them into his dream, then the Simpsons predictions aren't predictions at all. They're echoes. Homer's unconscious mind hears a news broadcast playing on a hospital television. It processes the information imperfectly, the way dreams always process information, distorted and incomplete. And when that garbled information happens to match a future event, we call it a prediction. But it was never a prediction, it was a report. Homer heard something real and dreamed a version of it that years later coincidentally aligned with reality. Think about the Trump prediction specifically. Bart to the Future aired in March 2000. The episode shows Lisa as president, dealing with the aftermath of a Trump administration. In the real world, in March 2000, Donald Trump had just ended his first exploratory campaign for president. He ran for the Reform Party nomination and dropped out in February 2000. This was covered extensively on television. Every news channel discussed it. If Homer was in a hospital room with a television playing in March 2000, he would have heard Trump's name associated with presidential campaigns. His dreaming brain would have processed this and incorporated it into the show playing inside his head. Homer didn't predict Trump's presidency. He heard the news coverage of Trump's first presidential bid and dreamed a version of it. The dream just happened to be more accurate than anyone expected because, as we discussed, American patterns repeat themselves, and a man who runs for president once tends to run again. Now connect the coma theory to Springfield's impossible geography. If Springfield exists inside Homer's dream, it doesn't need to be geographically consistent. Dreams don't have consistent geography. Rooms change size. Hallways lead to different places depending on when you walk through them. The landscape shifts based on emotional state, not physics. Springfield has oceans and deserts and mountains and canyons not because it's a real place with contradictory features, but because it's a dreamscape. Homer's sleeping brain generates whatever terrain the current dream needs. The ocean exists when Homer dreams about fishing. The desert exists when he dreams about being lost. The mountains exist when the dream requires distance and scale. Springfield's impossible geography is the most obvious proof that it's not a real place. It's a mental construct, generated on demand, consistent only in its inconsistency. And connect the geography to the mole man theory. If Springfield is a dream and the underground moleman represents something Homer's subconscious can't fully articulate, then moleman isn't a species. He's a symbol. In dream psychology, figures who emerge from underground typically represent suppressed knowledge, things the dreamer has buried, truths they've pushed down into the subterranean levels of their own mind because processing them would be too painful. Hans Moleman surfaces, tries to communicate, and dies over and over. That's Homer's subconscious trying to tell him something, some buried truth about his own condition, and failing. Every Moleman death is a failed attempt by Homer's deeper mind to break through the dream and deliver a message. And every time the message fails to arrive, the colony sends another one. Because the truth doesn't stop trying just because you're not listening. This also reframes Maggie's role in the show. If the coma theory is true, Maggie is the most tragic figure in the entire Simpson family. She's a baby, she will always be a baby. Homer last saw her as a 1-year-old on April 1st, 1993, and his dream can't age her because he doesn't know what she looks like as a toddler, or a child, or a teenager. In the real world, outside the coma, Maggie has grown up. She's in her 30s by now. She's lived an entire life that Homer has missed. But in the dream, she's frozen, a perpetual infant. The youngest child locked in place, silent because Homer never heard her speak. Maggie's intelligence in the show, her impossible competence, her ability to fire a gun and organize escapes and communicate without words, might be Homer's subconscious trying to imagine what she's become. He knows, on some level, that his baby isn't a baby anymore. His dreaming mind can't make her older, but it can make her extraordinary. Every brilliant thing Maggie does in the show is Homer imagining the life his daughter's living without him. Now connect all of this to Mr. Burns. If Burns is immortal, and if his immortality is sustained by the nuclear reactor, then Burns represents the one thing in Springfield that is genuinely, objectively real. Not a dream, not a projection, not a construct. Burns is real in the way that an institution is real. He existed before Homer's coma. He'll exist after Homer's coma. He represents the power structure that doesn't care about individual human consciousness. Burns isn't a character in Homer's dream. He's the architecture of Homer's reality that the dream can't change. The plant keeps running, the radiation keeps flowing, the contamination keeps spreading, and Burns, ancient and fragile and indestructible, keeps sitting in his office, indifferent to whether Homer is dreaming or awake, because either way, the plant needs a safety inspector who will never report what he sees. The connection between Burns and the power plant and Homer's coma creates a closed loop. Burns's plant irradiated Homer. The radiation damaged Homer's brain, making the crayon's suppressive effects worse, making Homer dumber, making him less likely to notice the danger he was in. Then the coma happened, and Homer's brain, already compromised by radiation and the crayon, sank into a dream it couldn't escape. The dream is sustained by the same electrical activity that the radiation stimulates. Burns's plant created the conditions for Homer's coma, and Burns's plant is, in a sense, keeping the dream alive. The radiation that damaged Homer's brain is the same radiation that generates just enough neural activity to sustain his dream state. Pull the plug on the plant and you might pull the plug on Homer. That's why Burns blocks out the sun. Not for greed, not for power, not even for immortality. Burns blocks out the sun because somewhere in the labyrinth of his ancient, diseased, immortal consciousness, he understands that the entire system depends on the plant. Homer's dream depends on it, Springfield's existence depends on it, the show itself depends on it. And if the plant ever goes dark, if the reactor ever stops humming, the dream ends. Homer wakes up or Homer dies. Springfield vanishes, the show is canceled. And Burns, finally, after a century and a half of stalemate biology and Three Stooges diseases and goal fillings and teddy bears, would be alone. The last living thing in a town that only existed because one man dreamed it into being. Let's talk about one more thing that connects to everything: the floating timeline. The Simpsons operates on a floating timeline where the present year updates but character ages stay fixed. Homer and Marge's backstory has been retroactively updated multiple times. In early episodes, they were teenagers in the 1970s. In later episodes, their youth was set in the 1990s. Their past changes to keep pace with the present while their ages remain constant. The show calls this a narrative convenience. But within the coma theory, it's something else entirely. Homer's dreaming brain is trying to maintain temporal coherence. It knows on some level that time is passing. It can hear changes in the real world, new presidents, new technologies, new cultural references. And it tries to update the dream to accommodate this information. But it can't age the characters because it doesn't have the processing power. The coma has degraded Homer's neural capacity to the point where he can run the dream, but he can't simulate biological aging across multiple characters simultaneously. So the dream compensates. It updates the calendar, it changes the music and the phones and the television shows within the dream. But the faces stay the same. The ages stay the same. The people Homer loves remain exactly as he last saw them, trapped in amber, while the world inside the dream creaks forward around them. This is why the early seasons feel different. Those seasons were written when Homer's dream was still fresh, still close to reality, still drawing on recent memories. The people felt real because they were based on people Homer actually knew. As the coma extends, as years become decades, the dream drifts further from reality. The characters become caricatures, the plots become absurd. The world becomes cartoonish in the literal sense, a cartoon of what life used to be, degraded by time and distance from the real world that Homer can no longer access. The decline in quality that critics associate with late-era Simpsons isn't a decline in writing. It's a decline in Homer's dream fidelity. The longer the coma lasts, the less his brain can maintain the simulation. Details blur, logic breaks, characters become flanderized, reduced to single traits, because Homer's degrading mind can no longer hold complex personalities. The show isn't getting worse. Homer's dream is getting weaker. The system is running out of power. And eventually, one day, the dream will crash entirely. The characters will freeze, the animation will stop, and somewhere in a hospital bed, a heart monitor will flatline, and the longest-running animated show in American television history will end. Not with a finale, not with a revelation. Just silence, a dream that finally ran out of power to sustain itself. And nobody will know it happened, because the dream was all there ever was. The show was always the dream. The viewers were always watching a dying man's fantasies. And when it ends, we'll call it a cancellation. We'll write retrospectives. We'll rank the best episodes. We'll debate whether the golden era ended in season 8 or season 12. But we'll never acknowledge what we were really watching for 36 years. A man dreaming, a machine beeping, a reactor humming. A town that doesn't exist, populated by people who were never real, in a state that was never named, on a map that was never drawn. And one day the beeping stops, and the humming stops, and the yellow people go still. And Homer Simpson, the man who asked God for the meaning of life and got 6 months instead of an answer, finally gets what he was promised. Not 6 months. 33 years of the most elaborate, beautiful, heartbreaking dream ever broadcast on American television. That's the meaning of Homer's life. He didn't live it, he dreamed it. And we watched, all of us, for 36 years. We sat down on our couches and turned on our televisions and watched a comatose man dream about his family, and we called it entertainment. God told Homer the meaning of life is something you learn when you die. Maybe the meaning of Homer's life is something we'll only learn when the show dies, when the last episode airs, when the credits roll for the final time, when someone somewhere finally decides to write a scene where the hospital room appears, where the heart monitor beeps, where the yellow fades to white, and Homer opens his eyes or doesn't. Either way, the dream was good. The dream was 36 years of laughter and music and family and a town called Springfield that existed in every state and no state, and only in the mind of a man who loved his family so much that even a coma couldn't make him forget them. They just stayed the same age, because that's how he loved them best, young, safe, frozen, forever in the moment before the vending machine fell. That's it. That's The Simpsons. 2 hours of disturbing theories, one endless dream, and a question that will never be answered because answering it would end everything. Is Homer awake? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, like the video, leave a comment, and I'll see you in the next one. Actually, I realize I need to take you through one more rabbit hole before we truly wrap this up, because there's an entire dimension of The Simpsons mystery we touched on but didn't fully explore. The relationship between Springfield and the real world, the fourth wall, and the show's own acknowledgement that it knows what it is. Because The Simpsons doesn't just tell stories, it tells stories about telling stories. And when you follow that thread deep enough, you arrive at a conclusion that makes every other theory we've discussed feel almost comforting by comparison. The Simpsons has broken the fourth wall more times than any other show in television history. Characters look directly at the camera. They reference Fox, the network that airs them. They discuss ratings. They talk about the writers. They acknowledge being on television. They know they're fictional, and the show treats this as comedy. Wink, wink, nod, nod. We know we're a TV show. Isn't that funny? But what if it's not a joke? What if the fourth wall breaks in? The Simpsons are genuine moments of awareness, characters briefly perceiving the truth of their existence, recognizing that they live inside a manufactured narrative controlled by forces outside their comprehension, and then having that awareness fade as the scene changes and the story continues. Consider the Behind the Laughter episode from season 11. This is a full-length Behind the Music parody where the Simpsons are presented as a real family who stars in a television show called The Simpsons. They have contracts, they deal with fame, they struggle with the pressures of being public figures. The entire episode treats The Simpsons as actors playing versions of themselves. This isn't a Treehouse of Horror episode, it's canon. The show officially, canonically established that one valid interpretation of its own reality is that the Simpson family are performers in a show about themselves. And then, in season 15, episode 4, the Regina monologues, when the Simpsons visit England, they literally comment on being fictional characters. In season 28, the show aired its 600th episode and again referenced its own existence as a cultural product. The writers don't just break the fourth wall, they demolish it, examine the rubble, and then rebuild it in time for the next episode. This creates a philosophical paradox. If the characters know they're in a show and they sometimes acknowledge being in a show, but they also live their lives as though the show is real, then what is their actual experience of consciousness? Are they aware all the time and choosing to pretend, or are they unaware most of the time with brief flashes of terrible clarity that they immediately suppress? The second option is more consistent with what we see on screen. Characters break the fourth wall in isolated moments. Homer looks at the camera, says something meta, and then goes back to his normal behavior. It's as though a curtain briefly opens, Homer sees something terrifying on the other side, and then the curtain closes and he forgets. The fourth wall breaks aren't comedy. They're seizures, moments where the simulation glitches and a character briefly perceives the true nature of their reality before the system corrects itself and wipes the memory. This connects back to the coma theory in a devastating way. If Homer is dreaming, and if his dream occasionally glitches, producing moments where dream characters briefly perceive that they exist inside a dream, then every fourth wall break is Homer's subconscious trying to wake up. The dream can't sustain itself perfectly, it cracks. And in those cracks, for just a second, the truth leaks through. Homer looks at the camera and talks to the audience because for one moment his sleeping brain is aware that there is an audience, that this is a show, that none of this is real. And then the dream patches the crack, and Homer goes back to eating donuts, and the audience laughs, and nobody acknowledges what just happened. The show's meta-awareness isn't a storytelling device, it's a symptom. Every time The Simpsons acknowledges its own fiction, Homer's coma is trying to break. And every time the show moves past that moment without consequence, the coma holds. The dream survives another episode. The simulation persists, and the man in the hospital bed stays asleep. There's a moment in the show's history that makes this theory especially painful. Season 23, Episode 9, Holidays of Future Past. This episode was genuinely considered as a potential series finale. It takes place 30 years in the future. Bart is divorced with 2 sons, Lisa is married to Milhouse, Maggie is pregnant, and Homer and Marge are elderly, still together, watching their grandchildren grow up. It's one of the most emotionally resonant episodes the show has ever produced. People cried watching it, critics praised it, it felt like the ending the show deserved. If Homer's in a coma, this episode is the cruelest thing the show has ever done. It's Homer's mind, aware that time is passing, aware that he's missing his children's lives, constructing a fantasy of what their future might look like. Bart with kids, Lisa married, Maggie pregnant, Homer growing old with Marge. All of it imagined, none of it real. A comatose man dreaming about the family milestones he'll never witness, the grandchildren he'll never hold, the old age he'll never reach. And the audience, unaware, watches this beautiful future unfold and thinks it's the show giving them a gift. When really it's Homer giving himself one final dream. The dream of getting to see his family grow up. The dream of being there for all of it. The dream of a future that a vending machine stole from him on April Fool's Day, 1993. That episode aired in 2011. The show continued. The dream continued. And that beautiful future, the one that made everyone cry, dissolved like every other dream Homer has ever had. Replaced by the next episode, forgotten by the next season. Just another story in a show that has been telling stories for 36 years without ever getting to the only story that matters. The story of a man who wanted to go home. There's a scene in season 1 that most people forget. Episode 3, Homer's Odyssey. It's called the bridge scene. Homer writes his family a farewell note, ties a rope around his waist, attaches it to a boulder, and carries the boulder to a bridge with the intention of jumping. It's one of the darkest moments in the show's history. A children's cartoon depicting its main character attempting suicide. Homer stands on that bridge, looks back at his house, and prepares to end his life. His family finds the note. They run after him. They scream for him to stop. Homer sees them coming and at the last second runs out to push them away from an oncoming car at a dangerous intersection. In that moment, Homer finds his purpose. He campaigns for a stop sign at the intersection. He becomes a safety advocate. He eventually becomes a safety inspector at the nuclear plant. His near death on the bridge leads directly to the job that irradiates him, which damages his brain, which contributes to the coma, which creates the dream, which becomes the show. The entire Simpsons is a chain reaction that started with a man on a bridge deciding to live. Homer chose life, and life gave him a coma. And the coma gave him a dream. And the dream gave him a family that never ages and a town that never changes. And a world where he's the main character and nothing he does has permanent consequences. And every bad decision gets reset by the next episode. The dream gave Homer exactly what the bridge couldn't. Safety, permanence, a world where you can fall into a gorge and walk away, where you can eat a poisonous fish and survive, where you can lose your job and get it back, where your wife always stays and your kids always need you and your friends always forgive you and nothing, absolutely nothing, ever truly ends. The Simpsons isn't just a show about a family, it's a show about the dream of a family. The idealized, impossible, eternal version of family that only exists when reality can't interfere. Homer dreams of a world where Bart is always 10 and always needs his dad. Where Lisa is always 8 and always has something to teach him. Where Maggie is always a baby and always needs to be held. Where Marge is always there, always patient, always waiting with a worried look and a warm dinner, and the same blue tower of hair she had the last time Homer saw her with his actual eyes. 36 years, 790 plus episodes, 30,000 jokes, 1 billion hours streamed on Disney Plus in a single year. the longest-running scripted primetime series in American television history. All of it. Every episode, every couch gag, every chalkboard, every dough, and every and every ay caramba. All of it happening inside the mind of a man who was crushed by a vending machine on April Fool's Day and never woke up. And we all watched. For our entire lives, some of us. We grew up with this show. We aged while the characters didn't. We graduated and got jobs and had children and buried parents, all while Bart stayed 10 and Homer stayed 40 and Springfield stayed Springfield. We lived the lives they couldn't live, and they dreamed the dream we couldn't dream, the dream where nothing changes, where nobody ages, where the people you love look the same today as they did when you were a kid watching cartoons on a Sunday night. Maybe that's why the show endures, not because it's funny, not because it's smart, not because it predicted Trump or smartwatches or a Cypress Hill concert with the London Symphony Orchestra. The Simpsons endures because it's the only place left where time stands still, where your family is always together, where the bad guys lose and the good guys bumble through and nobody ever really gets hurt. It endures because we need the dream just as much as Homer does, and as long as we keep watching, the machines keep beeping, the reactor keeps humming, and the dream keeps going. 21,000 words about a cartoon that might not be a cartoon. That's The Simpsons. That's Springfield. And somewhere in that town that doesn't exist, in that state that was never named, Homer Simpson is sitting on his couch, watching his television, eating his snack, surrounded by his family, completely unaware that the greatest trick Springfield ever pulled was convincing the world it was just a TV show. It was never just a TV show. It was always a dream. And the dreamer is still dreaming. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. But before you close this video, let me leave you with a few more details that will keep you up at night. Maud Flanders died in season 11 in the episode Alone Again, Natra Diddley. She was hit by a t-shirt cannon at the Springfield Speedway and fell from the top of the bleachers. Homer was supposed to catch the t-shirts. He ducked, Maud fell, she died, and she stayed dead. Unlike almost every other character death in The Simpsons, Maud's death was permanent. Ned became a widower. Rod and Todd lost their mother. The show dealt with the grief across multiple episodes. It was real. It was lasting. It mattered. Now think about that through the coma theory lens. Why would Homer's dream allow Maud to die permanently when nobody else does? Because Homer caused it. Homer ducked. Maud fell. In Homer's subconscious, the guilt is real even if the event isn't. Homer's dreaming mind can reset most consequences because they don't carry emotional weight. But the ones where Homer is directly responsible for someone's suffering, those stick. Those become permanent fixtures in the dream because Homer's guilt won't let them disappear. Maud's death is the dream punishing Homer for something he did. Not a cartoon consequence that resets next week. A wound that stays open because Homer, even in his deepest sleep, knows what he did. And this extends to every permanent change in the show. Edna Krabappel was retired from the show following actress Marcia Wallace's real-world death in 2013. Within the show, Edna died off-screen. Ned, who had married Edna in an earlier season, lost his second wife. But here's what's haunting. If Homer is in a coma, and if his dream incorporates ambient information from the hospital room, then Homer's sleeping brain heard someone nearby mention that Marcia Wallace had died. His dream processed this information and killed the character she played. Homer doesn't know the difference between the actress and the character. To his comatose mind, Edna Krabappel isn't played by Marcia Wallace. Edna Krabappel is a person who exists in his world. When the real person died, the dream person died too, because Homer's brain can't sustain a character once the voice it's modeled on is gone from the real world. This explains every character retirement in the show's history. Phil Hartman died in 1998. His characters Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz were quietly retired. No on-screen death, no explanation. They just stopped appearing. Because Homer's dreaming brain stopped hearing Phil Hartman's voice on television or in conversation, and without that audio input, his subconscious could no longer generate those characters. They faded from the dream the way people fade from your memory when you stop hearing their name. The show didn't retire these characters out of respect, though the real-world motivation was absolutely respectful and appropriate. The in-universe explanation, if the coma theory is true, is that Homer's dream requires external inputs to sustain its cast of characters. The voices Homer hears from the real world become the voices of Springfield. When a voice disappears from reality, it disappears from the dream. And the character attached to that voice simply stops existing, like someone you used to know whose face you can no longer picture. Springfield's population isn't stable. It fluctuates based on what Homer can hear, what Homer can imagine, and what Homer's degrading neural capacity can sustain. In the early seasons, when his brain was healthier, the cast was smaller but more detailed. Characters had depth, nuance, complex emotional lives. As the coma extends, as his brain weakens, the cast grows larger but shallower. More characters, less detail. Flanderization isn't lazy writing, it's cognitive decline. Homer's mind can no longer maintain complex personality profiles for hundreds of characters, so it simplifies them. Ned becomes just the religious neighbor. Barney becomes just the drunk. Moe becomes just the angry bartender. The richness drains from the supporting cast because Homer's brain is running out of resources. Every criticism leveled at late-era Simpsons, the decline in character depth, the increasingly outlandish plots, the reliance on celebrity cameos, the repetitive storylines, the flanderization of the entire cast, is explainable not as a writing problem but as a neurological one. The show isn't declining, Homer's brain is. And the dream, which was once vivid and detailed and grounded and real, is becoming faded and simplified and absurd because the machine generating it is wearing out. One day, the machine will stop. And on that day, the final episode of The Simpsons will air. The couch gag will play, the chalkboard will be written on, Homer will open a beer. Bart will ride his skateboard, Lisa will play her saxophone, Maggie will suck her pacifier, and then, without warning, without explanation, the screen will go dark. Not to black, to nothing, the absence of image, the absence of sound, the absence of dreaming. And 36 years of television will end the way 36 years of coma end. Not with a bang, not with a revelation, not with Homer waking up, or Homer dying, or Homer choosing to stay asleep. Just the quiet cessation of a consciousness that finally, after 3 decades of creating worlds and populating them with people it loved, ran out of the energy to keep going. That's how The Simpsons will end. Not because Fox cancels it, not because Disney decides it's time, not because the writers run out of stories or the audience runs out of patience. The Simpsons will end because Homer's dream will end, because all dreams end, because even the most elaborate, beautiful, heartbreaking simulation of life eventually confronts the simple biological fact that the brain generating it is mortal. Homer was mortal. Homer is mortal. Homer will always be mortal. But for 36 years, inside a dream sustained by a nuclear reactor and a damaged brain and a crayon lodged where no crayon should be, Homer Simpson got to live forever, with his family, in his town, on his couch, in front of his television, just like us. And maybe that's the meaning of life. The one God couldn't tell Homer, the one he was supposed to learn when he died. Maybe the meaning of life is that it ends, and the only thing that lasts is the dream you shared with the people who loved you while you had the chance. The Simpsons shared that dream with us for 36 years and counting. And if Homer ever wakes up, if the machines ever stop beeping, if the reactor ever goes dark and the dream finally dissolves, I think he'd want to know that we were here, that we watched, that we laughed, that we cared about his family as much as he did, because in the end, that's what the show always was. A father's dream about his family, broadcast to the world, for as long as the dreamer kept dreaming. Thank you for watching, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Same couch, same family, same dream. One last thing, and I mean it this time. One last connection that ties the entire 2 hours together. Remember the beginning of this video? We started with God telling Homer he had 6 months to live. We talked about the vending machine, the coma, the dream, and then we spent 2 hours traveling through Springfield, cataloging its impossibilities, mapping its mutations, tracing its secrets, following its dead men and its stolen names and its underground scouts and its immortal billionaire and its impossible geography and its prediction machine and its annual horror show that might not be fiction. But there's one detail from the very first theory that I saved until now, because it changes everything. When Homer meets God in Homer the Heretic, he asks God the meaning of life. God says he'll find out when he dies. Homer pushes. God starts to answer. He says, well, okay, the meaning of life is... And then the episode cuts away. We never hear the answer. Homer asks the biggest question a human being can ask, and the show deliberately, cruelly, intentionally refuses to let us hear the response. That's not a gag, that's the entire show. The Simpsons is a 36-year search for the meaning of life conducted by a man who was promised the answer and never received it. Every episode, every theory, every mystery, every prediction, every death, every resurrection, every treehouse of horror, every impossible geography, every silent Maggie, and every screaming Homer, all of it is one man trying to figure out what God was about to say before the scene changed. The meaning of life, the answer to the only question that matters. Homer was one sentence away from hearing it. And then the show cut to commercial. And it's been cutting to commercial ever since, for 36 years. Every episode ending before the answer comes. Every season promising more and delivering everything except the one thing Homer actually asked for. What is the meaning of life? God knows. Homer almost found out. And then a vending machine fell on him and he's been dreaming ever since, trapped in an infinite loop of almost answers and near misses and episodes that end right before the truth arrives. The Simpsons isn't a comedy. It isn't a satire. It isn't a cultural institution or a prediction machine or a merchandise empire. The Simpsons is the longest unanswered question in entertainment history. A man asked God for the meaning of life, and 36 years later, we're still waiting for the answer. Maybe the answer is the show itself. Maybe the meaning of life is family. Maybe it's donuts. Maybe it's sitting on a couch with the people you love and watching something together and laughing at the same jokes and feeling for 22 minutes at a time like the world outside doesn't matter. Maybe the meaning of life is the dream, not the answer to the dream, just the dreaming itself. The act of imagining a world where your family is safe and your town is whole, and your biggest problem is that your boss doesn't remember your name. Homer asked God for the meaning of life. God said he'd find out when he died. Homer said he couldn't wait that long. God said, you can't wait 6 months? It's been 33 years since those 6 months expired. Homer should have gotten his answer a long time ago. Instead, he got a dream. The longest dream in television history, populated by everyone he ever loved, set in a town that can't be found, broadcast to a world that watched without knowing what it was really watching. A dying man's final thought stretched across 3 decades of primetime television. And the thought, the dream, the show, the meaning of all of it, family. It was always family. That's why nobody ages. That's why nobody dies permanently. That's why the town resets. That's why the house rebuilds. That's why the couch is always there. Because in Homer's dream, family is the one thing that never breaks. The one thing that survives mutation and radiation and comas and immortality and stolen identities and underground colonies and blocked out suns and every other impossible thing Springfield has thrown at it. Family survives. That's the meaning of life. That's what God was about to say. And Homer, dreaming, already knew. He just couldn't hear it over the sound of a vending machine falling. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and drop a comment telling me which theory kept you up. I read every single one. And I'll see you in the next video. 2 hours, 10 theories, 1 dream, 1 family, 1 town that doesn't exist in any state but yours. The Simpsons, the longest-running animated series in television history. The show that predicted the future because it understood the present. The show that hid its darkest secret in its most famous joke. The show that told you everything and hid nothing, and still, after 36 years and 790 episodes, left you wondering whether any of it was ever real. It was real to Homer. That's enough. That has to be enough. Because if the dream is all there is, then the dream is everything. Good night, Springfield. Sweet dreams.